I'm Forrest Thigpen. I'm Senior Advisor at Empower, Mississippi. And we're glad to have our distinguished guests with us today, Jerron Smith and Bradley Lum. It has been mentioned, I think Grant mentioned this at the beginning, that Mississippi has the highest incarceration rate in the country. And the U.S. has the highest incarceration rate in the world. So if incarceration was the solution to public safety issues, Mississippi would be the safest place in the world. But we're not. So today we have two people who have all the answers on how to fix all of our problems. I did not tell them that when they came, that I was expecting that to be the result here today. But my friend Jerron Smith, you know, they're probably in this room, I know, because I know a lot of people in here, the opinions of Donald Trump in this room range from one extreme to the other. You worked in the White House with President Trump. You were special assistant to the president, which is actually a pretty significant title. And you worked with the Domestic Policy Council and the Office of Innovation. You managed the Office of Faith initiatives, and some other things as well that you did in your time there. So what everybody came here today to learn is, what is it really like working for him? I'm just kidding. That would be in the handbook of how to derail a perfectly good policy seminar. But the fact is that there were a lot of people who were surprised at the time, and still, even looking back, are surprised at how much political capital the president used to get the First Step Act passed, and you were in the middle of all those negotiations. So first of all, we let everybody know what the First Step Act was and what it did.
Sure. Well, one, I want to say thank you for having me. It's an honor to be in Jackson, Mississippi. I will answer your first question. Honestly, it was a great experience working for President Trump. I had the ability to really execute ideas that I've worked on in Congress for a number of years. And he allowed for me to do everything from economic development with opportunity zones to historic investments into historically black colleges and universities, to being the chief negotiator for the First Step Act. So when I first came into the White House, I had a interesting title, Director of Urban Affairs and Revitalization Policy. But what I ended up putting together was a four-step strategy around revitalizing underserved communities, which include economic development, safe communities, entrepreneurship, and education and workforce. But the piece around safe communities, we had a huge focus on reducing recidivism. And we learned from states like Texas and Georgia that you can reform your justice system in a way that protects public safety. If you're able to reform your prisons in a way that ensures that the individuals that are coming home from prison don't create crime again or don't commit a crime again. And so if you can lower that possibility, which we call recidivism reduction, then you're going to have less crime. And in Georgia and in Texas, when they did that, when they reformed their prisons, and they basically created this incentive that if a person, every person that comes into the prison gets a recidivism reduction program based off of their individual criminology. And if the person participates in that programming, they can serve some time off their sentence in home confinement. As a result, in Texas and Georgia, what ended up happening was they closed some prisons, were able to kind of save dollars there, and they also lowered crime. And so that playbook is what we use to reform our federal prison system. And so the First Step Back is federal prison reform, but it also included some other aspects that involved front-end crimes. For example, mandatory minimums. People are more familiar with the three-strike rule. We essentially got rid of the three-strike rule, and for the second and third strike, you won't be locked up for long term. This is if you're a nonviolent prisoner. We also did work around crack cocaine and powder cocaine. Senator Sessions and Dick Durbin 10 years prior to the administration lowered the discrepancy between crack and cocaine from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. However, there were still a number of individuals still locked up under the whole 100 to 1 regime. And so we were able to make that retroactive if that individual was able to go before a judge and they served good time. We gave the judges the ability to kind of let them home. Since we've passed the First Step Act, it's been drastically successful. We were able to lower those individuals who came home under the First Step Act, have a 12% recidivism rate.
And that just came out in the last couple of weeks.
Just
right?
came out in the last couple of weeks, where overall, the current recidivism rate for the Bureau of Prisons is 40%. So that's a drastic reduction, and we also were able to kind of accomplish our North Star. And so what we're doing now is encouraging more communities to take what we call a smart on crime approach to reforming the criminal justice system that focuses on making it a fair system, but at the same time protecting public safety.
Yeah, the recidivism rate that you might hear about is the rate of the percentage of people who get out of prison and then commit a crime after they're out of prison. And sometimes those rates are reflected after 3 years or 5 or 6 years. And so the First Step Act is young enough where we don't have those longer term numbers, but the initial ones certainly are. When comparing people under the First Step Act and those similarly situated who were not under the First Step Act, that's how they came to the comparison of 12%. Bradley Lum is the Deputy Commissioner of Corrections. He's over their workforce programs. Some people might be surprised to hear that there are workforce programs enough to have a deputy director for. But as we have learned, there's a whole lot to do in preparing people before they leave prison so that they don't commit a crime when they get out. What are you doing at the, this is a broad question, but what are you doing at the Department of
Well, and before I even answer that, Forrest, if you add a few titles after Jerron's titles, if you'd add a few to keep me to his level, that would be nice. So if there's anything else you'd like to say about me, I'd appreciate it. I'm just kidding. First off, thanks for the opportunity to be here. I think anytime I get to represent the department and represent the commissioner in the movements that we've made over the last several years, it's a good day and a good opportunity. And so I'm glad to be here. I think it was President George W. Bush, that said in the 2004 State of the Union that America is the land of second chances. And when the gates of the prison open, people should be in a better position than when they came in. And I think that for a long time, in the way that we've looked at corrections, it has not been that. It has been very tough on crime, very lock them up, throw away the key, and not understanding the nuance of the different reasons somebody comes to us. And so, over the last 3 years, I would say we've been building a plane while we've been having to fly it because we've got a lot of people that are in our custody that we've got to work with, but we've also got to build out systems, and sometimes that can be frustrating. And so we're in the middle of the build out of a lot of those systems. Over the last year to 2 years, we've infused about $1 million in investment and resources into hard training. So anything from learning how to be a plumber, learning how to be a welder, learning how to do a construction trade, you name it. All of the, running the gamut of the things that we look at as high wage opportunities in the state of Mississippi and what the employers are saying. So we've started to infuse that across the state. We just recently broke ground or had a ribbon cutting on our CMCF vocational village. That's at Central in Rankin County. We've got multiple different trade options there where our inmate population is able to go through those trades and earn a credential when they come out. Again, we're building a plane while we're flying it. We're in the process of launching what we're calling a reentry academy across the state. That reentry academy is going to be paired with our presumptive parole processes that were part of legislation several years back that have not really been, that presumptive parole process has not really been adequately used to this point. I think that's a fair way to say that. And so we're in the process of putting those who qualify under presumptive parole in a plan from an intake process where they know what their case plan is, what they have to do to ensure that when they go in front of the parole board, they're ready to be paroled out. So there are all kind of things that are happening across the state of Mississippi in your Department of Corrections because we have recognized under the leadership of our current commissioner that without question, we have got to prepare people for ultimately reducing the recidivism rate and ensuring that when they get out, they're in a sustainable place. I hear all the time from folks who are out, that program wasn't there when I was incarcerated, or that program didn't exist at the prison I was at. And so that's a good thing, right? I mean, that tells me that we're making progress. But I have to temper expectations a lot of times when I'm talking to my staff that it is a process. It is not something that we can flip a switch on. We have dealt with a lot of the policy issues over the last 10 years. Forrest has been instrumental in a lot of that here at the state level. And now we're actually looking at how do we get to the outcomes. My role calls me to be a pragmatist. It's about the outcomes. Too often in state government, it's about an output. We like to put it on paper. We don't like to actually get to the outcome. And in the role that I'm in, if we don't get to outcomes, it has a direct impact on society. And so our focus is on ensuring that we get outcomes, and that's what we focus on every day.
Yeah, well, wouldn't it be great if we had people in positions like Bradley's that had that same attitude in all agencies? I did learn, both of you have touched on this a little bit, but I learned a term that I've had to practice saying. It's criminogenic risk needs analysis, or assessment.
Assessments and needs
Sorry.
assessment, yes.
Okay, I need to practice more. But what that really means is criminogenic is the likelihood that somebody's going to commit another crime. The risk needs analysis is what's the risk of their doing that, and what do they need to avoid doing that. So really it's just how likely is it that you're going to commit a crime when you get out, and what do you need in order to not do that.
That's right.
It could be drug treatment, it could be mental health treatment, it could be job training.
Right.
It could be any number of things.
That's right.
And so it's such a breadth of things that have to be addressed that y'all are working on.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. I mean, they categorize people as high, medium, low, or minimum. And even individuals that are at the minimum level could do things because in many cases, that's like your white-collar criminal. And so in many cases, they get credit for participating in that programming for teaching classes or teaching other inmates. But to your point, most of our prisons, even federally, aren't retrofitted to kind of think about that robust programming. And so we have to rethink the way we do rehabilitation to allow for, one, to have the staff to work in those type of facilities, to having the space, the building to be retrofitted for that. And so, but we've seen when you have that in place, on top of it with the incentives, because the inmates have to have the incentives to participate in the program. So I mentioned if you were minimum or low in those two low categories, then you were incentivized to participate in that program because you got to serve some of your time on the back end from home confinement. And then you earned time during a month for participating in that programming. Other things is like commissary. Of course, if you have a vocational job, we created bank accounts so people could save money for when they leave prison. This is also a lot of incentives around being able to spend time with your family or talk with your family a lot more. All those are little carrots that get people to participate in this programming, and it's just shown to work.
Yeah. In the parole bill that passed 2.5 years ago that's going to be up for reauthorization next year, there was a requirement for why this had to be put into law to be a requirement, I'm not sure, but a requirement that when somebody comes into prison that within a very short amount of time, they're supposed to have a case plan that has all this laid out so that the idea is that if you do these things that are in this case plan, then when you're eligible for parole, then as long as you haven't been misbehaving in prison, that you'll be able to get out. But Bradley, as you said, systems can take a while to change.
That's a good way to put it, Forrest.
Thank you. I tried to be diplomatic. And especially when you're working with a government agency, And so y'all are really just now getting to the point where not only do you have the systems, but it really takes a mindset, like you described, of expectations of the people who work there to not think, well, we've never had to do this before, so I'm sure they won't really make us do it. And the people who are in prison suffer, and the people who are out of prison, the rest of us who are out of prison suffer, because those people, 95% of people who go to prison are going to get out.
That's right.
And so we can either warehouse them, and then when it's their time is up, or when it's time for parole, they get $50 and a bus ticket, and we say, good luck. And what are they going to do? They're going to go right back to where they came from, doing the same things that got them there, and we are less safe for it.
That's right. And to add to that, for those that don't know, our current commissioner, Burl Kane, if he has an idea, he's going to immediately, he wants it done. I think any Department of Corrections employee here would say amen to that. Amen. He wants it done, and I think that is what has driven a lot of the change that we've seen in a short period of time from the intake process. Intake wasn't working. We reimagined it. We've had a process at our central facility that put people into what was called quick bed at that time through records and classification, and we have started reimagining that. How do we get people in the right place to ensure that whatever their plan is, they have the resources they need to actually carry out that plan, and that we're not just warehousing them in one location. And so all of those pieces, when you're talking about 20,000 individuals across the state of Mississippi and 6 institutions and 15 regionals and CWCs and all these different places, it does take time, but we are light years ahead of where we were just a few short years ago. And a lot of that is certainly to the credit of the commissioner, who just has come in and said, we are going to make changes in these ways, and if it's not getting the results that we want, we're going to change you. We're going to put somebody else in that position that can do it. And that's been really positive for the ultimate goal of ensuring that we do give second chances to our inmate population as they're coming out.
Yeah. Jerron, I don't know if we've talked about this, so this may be an irrelevant revelation. I was one of those people that pushed for the tough on crime, the 3 strikes and you're out, truth in sentencing legislation in the 90s. We worked to get that passed. And the premise then was that relatively few people commit the vast majority of crimes. Mm-hmm. The fact is, that was true then. It's still true now. But somehow in the way the laws were written, and if I was part of that, then I'm confessing here, but they went too far. Those laws went too far. Tell us about that.
Sure.
What are we seeing now?
What you saw was just kind of an explosion of a lot of people being in prison for a long time, even for nonviolent offenses or first-time offenses. And that's done a lot to families and communities. And so what we saw, and there's statistics related to, having an incarcerated parent, there's likelihood that the child also is just as involved as well. And so the wake of doing the mass incarceration have left communities still struggling with either parent or both parent in the prison system, and then it comes back around. And so I think that we also know that if you a person who commits a crime, they're not less likely to commit a crime if they stay there a long time. Right. So if you're 2 to 3 years, you kind of understand what you've done, and actually if the longer they stay, there's some likelihood that they may even do worse crimes when they come out because of the way prisons are situated. Like, you can be traumatized within the prisons, violent acts, things happen within the prison, which makes a person less likely to be successful when they leave prisons.
Yeah. You actually learn how to be a more efficient criminal.
Oh, that's exactly right. And so that's why we needed to rethink the way that we wanted to do prisons and locking people up. Now, this is my thought. We've been very surgical about looking at individuals who are violent versus nonviolent crimes. There certainly needs to be accountability factor there. After working with community groups, or even individuals who are formerly incarcerated, because I work a lot with them on community safety. You know, there are individuals in the community that may need that time in prison, you know, in order to kind of figure out, you know, themselves and kind of get better, you know, but our prisons got to be retrofitted to kind of receive those people in a way that's going to make sure that they're better citizens when they come home. But you got to have that accountability piece. So it's not. I'm not an advocate of like not having, you know, just kind of getting rid of our whole system, because we obviously have people who are going to do crimes and they need to be held accountable for those crimes. But we shouldn't take a one-size-fits-all approach towards each of these individuals. We should take more of a individualized approach, look at their criminology, what's the reason why they came into prison in the first place, and what can we do to create that healing to make sure that they don't come to prison again and are able to kind of restart their lives in a productive manner.
Yeah, Bradley, you mentioned the things that y'all are doing in the prisons. I think you mentioned forklifts, and you've made sure that there's now at least one forklift in every
facility has a forklift. That's
And-
important, and it sounds like, you know, one of those things was like a forklift. I see a forklift when I drive by Walmart, and it's out by the dock. But what we find, because of advanced manufacturing and logistics, is that the need for those who are certified in forklift, you know, ability to drive a forklift has skyrocketed. We get calls every day asking for 10 or 12 forklift drivers. And so that's one of those certifications that you can, in 2 to 3 days or 4 days, give somebody a credential that they can walk out of prison and have a job waiting for them, being able to operate a forklift. And that's important.
Yeah, okay, I'll add to your title. Bradley also is over what used to be called Mississippi Prison Industries. It's now called MDOC Works. And you have, as part of that, there's now a new program that y'all started just recently that is a work release program. And there is, last year we had somebody here talking about the Rankin County version of this, but this is in the state prison system. Tell us about that.
Well, look, I'll give credit to Chairman Barnett, Juan Barnett in the Senate, chairman over our corrections committee. He came to us, to the commissioner and myself, and said, look, we want to get this done this year. This was 2 years ago. And we, you know, the appetite was there in the legislature to ensure that we got a pilot off the ground, similar to what they had done in Rankin County under Sheriff Bailey. So we started last August with the opportunity for 25 individuals. It was capped at 25, still is until that changes. For 25 individuals to move into our new work release center, where they would go out every day and they would go to a job and they would make an income, and that by the statute we would divide that money up, and they would have different pots that they would put that money in. And I can, you know, sit here unequivocally a year later and say that it's been, I don't know what we would call, you know, a mistake in that program. Everything that has happened has been a home run. We have, I think they've earned at last count somewhere around $800,000 in wages. $800,000 amongst almost 52 different individuals who have gone through the program over the last year, but they're putting half of that in savings. I mean, that's big numbers for individuals who will be getting out within the next year by way of parole or flat time. And so overwhelmingly, we've seen it be a success. We've seen a number of employers come to us after the fact saying, I need employees to come work for me, and we say, we've only got 25 and they're all booked up right now, so we can't put them with you. We've got them in both public and private jobs. You know, one of the things I say a lot is, look, I live in the city of Jackson, and so I have to deal with our water and sewer issues, unfortunately. But we need public works employees across the state. Doesn't matter what city you live in, whether it's Greenville or Corinth or Jackson or anywhere, and those are good jobs, and they're jobs that are stable, and they put them in a path where they can have a career. And so we've got individuals that are working in some of our local cities in public works type jobs. We've also got individuals that are working in private employment. We've got some in the diesel tech world that are going to walk out of prison with significant money in savings. And so it's been an overwhelming success, thanks to the legislature for moving that forward and having that vision a few years ago. And we hope that we can see that expanded.
Yeah, it's a brilliant concept that instead of just working in the prison where they may work for 20 or 30 cents an hour or something like that, doing just tasks inside the prison, it's voluntary, but if they do it, then they get a little money for the commissary, for snacks or whatever. And but these jobs that we're talking about are actual jobs. They're full pay jobs, and this money goes into these accounts. I think, at least in Rankin County, I'm not sure how y'all do it, that half the money goes into savings and a certain portion pays fines and fees, and a portion pays some of the administrative costs.
That's right.
No, it doesn't cover it all, but it covers some of the administrative costs. So it pays for itself. And then you have people who are already working in a place, and so when their time comes, and they enter this program within the last year or so of their sentence, I believe.
That's correct.
And so they have a job already. And those people have an infinitesimal recidivism rate compared to people who leave with a bus ticket and $50.
We have not had anybody return to this point, cross our fingers, but of the 52 that have gone through the program, about 20 have either been paroled out or left us on flat time, and so we have not had anybody return. We've had the majority of those, except for a few individuals who moved to different parts of the state and didn't keep that job. They've taken the job that they were working and continued on in that path. And I will add to that I didn't say earlier, I think we've paid somewhere in the neighborhood of about $85,000 in fines and fees back to counties across the state. And that's a big number. I mean, you think about releasing somebody on parole, and if you're a county and that county's owed $1,500 in court fees and fines and other things, the chance of them actually getting that back in any type of short period of time is not very good. It's going to take a long time to do that. So we're putting them in a position where they're starting to pay back their debt to society in that way.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about 25 people.
That's right.
And you're paying that kind of money back. Plus, restitution is also part of it.
And child support. So all of those are covered under the statute that where that money goes.
That if they didn't have that, when they get out, they have no job, they get $50. They're going to have to pay $55 to their parole officer within a month, and they don't have money to pay a down payment to try to get a car or to get a place to live. But this way, they don't have those obstacles. That doesn't mean they're all going to be perfect and all have zero recidivism, but it certainly means they at least have a chance. And then if they don't take those chances, then you pick different ways of punishing, creating consequences. Jerron, as you can imagine, I know you've seen this across the country, and especially, I'm sure that you got this when you were in the Trump White House, where people are conservatives, who generally are the tough on crime people. Mm-hmm. They look at these things that we're talking about and they label it as soft on crime. That it's not a conservative thing to do, and especially in the last few years, as we've seen the spike in violent crime, we have had people who have said, well, that's because of the parole bill from a few years ago. Well, that doesn't match the timing, for the one thing. Secondly, it's a nationwide phenomenon. And thirdly, states in our region who have not passed any reforms like we did, had a higher increase in violent crime than we did. So there's really no connection, but and it's election year. So it's easier to slide into that rut and just say, oh, we need to repeal those things we did, as if that had anything to do with it. But just in terms of the labels of conservative or not conservative, I'm sure you faced that. How did you address those?
Sure. I mean, well, when we were negotiating the policy at that moment in time, in Congress, the House and the Senate were both Republican. The legislation that was debated under the Obama administration called the Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act was a piece of legislation that Paul Ryan couldn't move, and certainly Senator McConnell didn't really want to touch. And so what we did in the Trump administration is we wanted to peel the onion back and look at the area where we had the most common ground, and that was reforming the prisons. And after working with Senator Cornyn's office, Congressman Collins, and Hakeem Jeffries, we were able to figure out an area where we had the most common ground, and that was reforming the prison systems. Everything from not having women shackled while they were giving birth, which was honestly that happened. I even know some women that had to go through that experience while they were giving birth. You had even hygiene products for women inside the prisons weren't available. We were able to kind of get that. And then even the nonprofits and churches that did great work with helping get people's lives on track were restricted from working with those individuals once they left the prisons. And then clarifying good time credit was something that really allowed for more individuals who serve good time in prisons to get the fullness of a benefit that's always been there for the last 40 years. And that brought everyone together. And I think after just focusing on the prison reform piece, which passed the House overwhelmingly, I think we only lost 2 Republicans and once it passed the House. When we went into the Senate, we still took a very surgical approach towards it. We were careful not to make everything retroactive. There were some exclusions for violent criminals with violent crimes, so we had an exclusive focus on nonviolent individuals. And then ultimately, we got the 90% of each house to vote for the bill, which was both Republican houses. But we did that, again, by focusing on public safety, getting the support of law enforcement. After we passed the law, and then after the pandemic, something new arose. We had a huge push nationally to defund police departments. And many localities began defunding their police departments and demoralizing those police departments. It wasn't until maybe August of that year, the protest maybe started in May, that the stats started to come out that most communities, communities of color, any underserved community you can think of, all of them, over 80%, not only did not want to defund the police, they wanted more police presence.
Yeah. Or act as if they don't really care about public safety. They just want to let people out.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I wrote an executive order in the Trump administration where we work with the families, like Ahmaud Arbery's mother and the sheriff associations, the FOP, and we were able to kind of write an executive order to talk about where there was common ground. There was common ground around share, like co-responder services, like police being able to show up with a mental health professional or social worker for individuals with addiction or having a mental health crisis or homelessness. Most police support accountability, especially for bad cops, and so we were able to negotiate a database that can help federally capture bad cops, of course, with due diligence and due process. If a person wanted to make a case to say that they didn't do a crime. But there are a lot of things on common ground. But still, all of these issues around public safety are very local. And a lot of local jurisdictions didn't necessarily follow that federal way of kind of bringing police and community together. And so you have sections of the community where you see police departments don't have the numbers that they used to have, and then they're disincentivized for doing their job because there's also new laws that have come out that incentivize crime, like a simple crime of let's say jacking a car or someone still in the car. There may be like in DC they took the pursuit policy and they got rid of it for the police. And so what did that do? That created an avenue where there was more carjackings, as a result. And they still have increased carjackings. I think carjackings in Washington, D.C. are up like 300%. Or you take a place like Baltimore where they basically disallowed children from being questioned, even with the permission of their parents, and less accountability for certain crimes. And so you have juveniles that commit crime over and over again. Now,
I'm just a little sensitive on the time here, but
Right.
I know that on the public safety front, you lead a coalition now
Correct.
called Public Safety Solutions for America.
Correct.
And Empower is proud to be a part of that coalition. But you have been going around the country highlighting the opposite of what you're just talking about.
Correct.
And that's local places, unexpected places that actually are doing it right. Tell us what
That's
they're
exactly
doing
right.
that we can learn
So
from.
Public Safety Solutions for America have 4 principles. One, fund the police. And it's not just funding the police. It's essentially we want the best police, best trained police. We want to retain the police officers that we have. And we also want to ensure that all communities have access to the police department if they need that public safety piece. The second piece is allowing for the police officers to spend most of their time on solving violent crime and preventing violent crime. Right now they spend like 7% of their time on that. That's why co-responder programs are extremely helpful. And then number 3 is evidence-based policies that we know lower violent crime. And so on the opposite side, we realize that there is pre-existing conditions. There are conditions that exist in some of these urban areas which creates crime. Like if you have bad education, if you don't have access to jobs, you don't have access to opportunity, behavioral health issues. There's a number of different things, but we know that focused deterrence works. You can have a carrot-and-stick approach by offering those type of opportunities, but also allowing the community to partner with the police to micro-target the individuals that are doing the crime.
Yeah, to put enough police, have enough funding for the police, for them not only to have the training to be well paid, but to have enough of them in the community where the people in the neighborhoods who know who the criminals are.
That's exactly right.
The police are there enough that they gain the trust of the local people, and so they identify the people who are most likely to commit crimes. They go to them and say, look, we're going to give you a chance to do whatever they are allowed to do. And if you don't, then we're coming after you because we know that you're doing this.
Know that you're doing a crime. And the thing is it's worked in places like Dallas.
Yeah.
I've worked with a community leader, Anton Lucky, former gang member, came out and started a program called Urban Specialists where they train individuals who have trusted the community, on how to live a productive life and have an alternative to crime. And he works directly with law enforcement. And as a result of that, they're one of the only major metropolitans where you're seeing a huge dip in violent crime in their city. Another area is Miami. Miami is another area which you've seen exponential growth because of their economy, people moving there, but you've also seen like a 50-year low in like murder rates because they're doing something similar with working with the police, not only just working with them, but also providing opportunity and creating that trust in the community so that the police can do their job. Because the police needs to work with the community to do their job, but in many cases, you see, like I've been in other cities where they don't have that trust with the police.
Yep.
So the community is not willing to share intelligence on what's going on because they're afraid that like if they share with the police, then there'll be someone coming after them and the police is not going to be there.
That's right.
And so that trust piece is extremely important. And our coalition has been working to try to create that trust on the ground by promoting these solutions.
Yeah, that's great. I've got a couple of more quick things to get to. Bradley, my mind just went blank. So let me.
Well, let me say this for us. I'll let you rethink that question. I'll give you just a second. We deal with that same question a lot. What's the conflict in the tough on crime position and second chances? And I would say, personally, I got 4 kids under the age of 12. I think I'm pretty tough on crime if crime comes at me. Really. I mean, I would be tough on crime. I've got 4 kids under the age of 12. But I also recognize that that's a nuanced conversation. And the nuance is that if you don't believe in second chances, then you're perpetuating cycles of crime. And you're ultimately being tough on your law enforcement officers because our law enforcement officers around the metro arrest the same people all the time. It makes no sense to me that the conversation can't be looked at through the lens of how do we make it better versus which side am I going to be on. I look at Jackson, where I live, Hinds County. We have the largest number of individuals coming back to both Harrison County and Hinds County from our prison population. The reality is the positions that we've taken over the last 30 to 40 years have created cycles of what we see in rising criminal behavior across places like Hinds County. It just is what it is. And until we start to say and recognize that second chances and putting fathers back in homes and putting, frankly, black men back in those environments to be leaders in those environments again, just like what Jerron was talking about, until that starts to happen in our specifically urban environments where we're seeing a lot of high crime activity, we won't see changes made. So being tough on crime, being smart on crime, and second chances can coexist. And that's a good thing for the state. Ultimately, it means that the investment that we have to make into the Department of Corrections goes down because the number of people coming to us go down. And ultimately, it means that those who are getting out are back into the workforce, our labor participation rates go up, and those people don't recidivate and they don't come back to us. All of those things are good things for the state of Mississippi, and all of those things are things that, as a department, under the direction of the commissioner, we are pushing for. We want to make sure that we are giving people second chances to ensure that they are not creating public safety problems for our communities across the state. And I think that if we do that, we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years really big gains made across the state.
Yeah, I mentioned this last year's Unleash. Those of you who were here last year remember Randy Hicks, who's the head of the Georgia Center for Opportunity. And he had hired a group of folks to come in, consultants of some sort, and said, I want you to go into inner city Atlanta and tell me how we can strengthen the institution of the family. And they came back to him after doing a lot of interviews and studies, and they said, you need to do criminal justice reform. And he said, no, wait, I'm talking about how do we strengthen the family? And they said, criminal justice reform, because not only are the fathers they're outside the home, they're locked up, but also the women will not marry people who can't get a job because they have a criminal record or are in and out of prison without getting any help to be able to get a job when they get out. So it really all does fit together and requires us to think differently and not fall into the ruts of lock them all up or let them all out. That's a dangerous dichotomy that in today's political environment is easy to fall into, and even more especially during an election year.
Sure.
The question I was going to ask you that I actually touched on a little bit is you've owned businesses, including a trucking company, if I recall correctly, and so you've seen it from the business owner side. Why would a business owner want to hire somebody with a criminal record? It sounds kind of risky. Why would they want to, and what are the assurances that, obviously not 100% assurance, but reasonable assurance that you could give to employers who want to? I mean, I hear from, I know there are manufacturers, there are all types of companies that are saying, we need people, we used to be opposed to this, but now we're seeing actually there's benefit to it. But
Yeah.
why would they want to?
Well, I think there's several factors. One, obviously, is that we need more people in the workforce. In a state like Mississippi, we need more people in the workforce. We have spent and invested lots of money into things, and I talked to Jim McHale earlier about, visited with him, but Ascent to 55 and some of the things that are happening around workforce in our state, we have got to increase the number of people in our workforce. Those who have felony backgrounds are an obvious source of increasing our workforce participation rate in the state of Mississippi. So that's the overarching issue. But more specifically to actually an employer hiring an employee who's been incarcerated, there's some tangible benefits to that. One is the federal bonding program that allows for bonding those employees once for I think about a 6-month period once they've been released. You've got the work opportunity tax credit that offsets about, I think it comes out to be about $2,400 in tax credits for about a year period once you've hired that individual as they've come out. So those are tangible benefits. But more than that, and I visited with some of our workers who work for us at our downtown location at MDOC Works yesterday and kind of asked their opinions on that question. And I think the thing that really came out from that discussion was trust. So many folks who've been incarcerated have never had anybody that trusted them before, right? They've never had it. And so by and large and overwhelming, and certainly there are going to be cases where something bad happens, right? That you can't help that. That's true for life, much less just the prison population that's coming out of incarceration. But the trust factor of ensuring that you're trusting an individual to do a job, and the fact that they believe, man, this may be my only shot. This may be all I have. And if I don't do this right, I may not have another shot. And so there's a lot of built-in characteristics to success and to what an employee, or to the success that an employee can have in your company, when you look at it from the perspective of, man, sometimes and a lot of times these folks, nobody's trusted them ever. There's never been any hope for an opportunity. That's not something that they came from. And so you're reimagining that for them and putting them in a position where you start to see that there's just tremendous benefit to bringing them into your workplace. And I tell employers this all the time, but just half jokingly, but our prison population deals with a whole lot of different personalities. And those personalities are also in the workforce. And so you're getting somebody, and we've heard this from several employers, that it made sense to elevate that individual to a management role because they have dealt with so many different types of personalities. So I think there are multiple benefits to hiring those who have been incarcerated. And ultimately, it's our job, and my job in my position, to ensure that we're spreading that message. This is a long game. It's not like we're going to look up in a year and see that everybody that's getting out of prison is becoming employable. But the process was started years ago, and we're continuing on in the process. And I hope that we look up again in 10 years and see that, man, look at the strides look at the wake that's behind us and the strides that have been made in those who have been incarcerated coming out and being in gainful employment so that they're sustainable, that they can live a good life, and they don't ever have to go back to prison.
Yeah, thank you. At Empower, we're not trying to come to a political conclusion on this. We're trying to find solutions. And often what we find in my 30 years of doing public policy in Mississippi, what I found is the way that you do that best is when you actually engage with people, when you listen, not with the purpose of figuring out what your argument against whatever they're saying is going to be, but you actually listen to what their perspective is and what their life experience is. And the things that we, especially as conservatives, we pass things, and somewhere 3 steps down and 4 steps across, somebody has something negative that happens. And that's looked at as, oh, well, that was your intent. When if we were talking to people and listening and saying, I would never have intended that, we could have made this tweak up here if we had known that was a problem, a potential problem. So that's how we need to approach, especially this subject that has so many facets to it. So let's make that our goal, is to talk with each other, listen to each other, and find actual solutions and not try to score political points. Ian Rowe is coming up next, and he will be talking about how to overcome negative messages, how to reject the victim mentality, which is something that is not only valuable for us to help kids learn about, but it's important for us as adults, and it's important for Mississippi, since we can tend to fall into that rut as well. So, and really, in some ways, that's a continuation of what we've been talking about here. But for now, help me thank our guests, John Smith, Bradley Moore.